Hey everybody. Today we're going to talk about the seventh example test in the node testing system for Zulip. So my audience today consists of people who are developing JavaScript software for the Zulip project and who are writing unit tests in what we call the node testing system. Ideally, you will find my previous videos in which I cover examples 1 through 6. And even more ideally, you will have already read those test examples in the web tests repo. And of course, they follow a numbering convention. There are examples 1 through 8, I believe. And by the time you read this video or watch this video, of course, there may be more examples or fewer examples. So in this video, I'm not going to go too deep on the test itself. It's only 152 lines, including a rather large comment at the top that I'll just let you read yourself. And then there's some boilerplate, and then the entire example just consists of a single test. And I am going to go a little more line by line on that. But before I get into that, I want to kind of reinforce some concepts that I probably talked about a little. Well, I definitely talked about in some of the earlier videos. And it's the general structure of a single test. So in any single test, and by a single test, I basically mean any of these like little individual tests that are enclosed in a run test wrapper. The general structure of a single test is almost always going to be the same, give or take a few steps. You clear out the irrelevant data, then you set up the pertinent data for the test. You create any necessary mocks or stubs, and some mocks simulate behavior. Other mocks simply short circuit deep function calls. I use mocks and stubs sort of interchangeably, and there's some debate on what the difference actually is between them. But just so you understand my vocabulary, I'm not overly precise about the difference between a mock and a stub. They achieve the same general effect. But anyway, then you make the before assertions, and then of course you perform the action that you're testing, and then finally you make the after assertions. And in some rare cases, you want to clean up some side effects of your data, but that is usually the responsibility of the other tests to make sure that the other tests ensure that they have their own clean slate. But certainly, if there's any cleanup that you can do on your own, you should. And there will be an example of that in example 7. And then I'm going to talk about the writing process. And that's where I think this video can add some value, because the way you write the tests, the order that you write the tests usually is not the order that the tests execute in. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. But let's dive into example 7. So in example 7, we're testing this unread ops thing. And if this is already an example where you kind of don't always read tests the first time straight way down, kind of want to see what's being tested. And I probably could have done a better job here. By the way, my name's Steve. I'm the original author of these tests. I probably could have done a better job here kind of calling out that this is the actual thing being tested. We're calling unread ops process visible. And I should give some Zulip context here. When you're using the Zulip product and you're in a stream and you're just reading messages, as soon as those messages become visible on the screen, then Zulip assumes that you have read the message quite naturally. And then part of the responsibility of this function is to make sure that the client posts a message to the server using this URL of JSON message flags, telling the server which messages it has read. And apparently here we're going to tell it that we have read message 50. So anyway, that's what the function is supposed to do. Let me go back here really quickly and just kind of reinforce the structure that we're looking for here. We should clear out irrelevant data, set up pertinent data, create mocks, before assertions, perform the action, after assertions, cleanup. Okay, so let's see how well I followed that general strategy here. So up here, these are all functions function calls to clean up data. And then I set up the message ID 50, and you've already seen that this 50 here is what we expect to eventually post to the server. So obviously it's important to have that message. And then we create the test messages. And then this line here, line 93, is it's kind of murky where it fits into this overall strategy, but I would basically lump this into kind of clearing out irrelevant data. Or maybe actually I would lump that into setting up pertinent data. So we want the recent topics util module to actually process message for this test. So we set visible. Oh, I understand. This is clearing out data. Yeah, we are making it look. I'll come back to that. I read this before, but I didn't read it carefully enough. Okay, and then now here is more data set up. So we're actually putting this test message that's going to the Copenhagen topic with message ID 50. We are actually putting it into our message cache here. And then we are processing it on a data level in the unread module. And the unread module is like the data layer of the whole unread system, which is fairly involved. Looking forward again, we are testing at a higher level, which is the unread ops system. And the unread ops is more like a controller module than a data module. Okay, now here's where we're setting up the stubs. And again, if you go back to my notes, some mocks actually simulate behavior, other mocks simply short circuit deep function calls. These first couple overrides here are simulating behavior. We want the message viewport to report to us that the viewport is visible and focused, and that the bottom message is indeed visible. And then when we make a call into message list current to get all messages, we want that to simulate the fact that we're just returning our test messages up there, which you just saw. But then we get into these stubs that are all about ignoring interactions. And that gets to the second sub bullet here. Other mocks simply short circuit deep function calls. And if you want to get sort of precise about the difference between a mock and a stub, these up here are more like mocks. These down here are more like stubs. And then I didn't really cover this in the overall general strategy, but here what we're trying to do is we're trying to override the post method of channel so that it actually captures the options that we're passing into post. And that comes down to what we're going to assert here later. So I don't know where that would actually fit into this overall structure. I mean, it's, let me add a bullet here. Some mocks actually capture behavior. And I should point out that these testing patterns transcend just the Zulip JavaScript client. You'll see the exact same patterns in the Zulip server, in the Python test for the Zulip server, and you will certainly see these patterns in other projects outside of Zulip. This is kind of tried and tested methodology for writing unit tests. So where was I? Let's see. Okay, so yeah, so I override channel post in order to capture the options. And then I set up a couple more overrides, and then let's see, first test for a message list that cannot read a message. Okay, so I talk about making the before assertions and the after assertions. So what I'm doing here is I'm asserting that if you are not allowed to mark messages read, then when we call process visible, then the channel post options should be undefined. But then when I flip the flag and call process visible, those options should be defined. And then finally at the end, this is what I was talking about, a little bit of cleanup. This last line, which uh, clears the queue in our message flag code, and this is sort of a weird detail of Zulip that I'm not going to go deep on, but let me just tell you that it's sort of a unusual thing that you have to do due to the somewhat complex way that we send messages to the server. So this has the effect of both clearing out channel post ops, but it also exercises that code to a certain degree. Let's say that the call to, where is it up here? Let's say that our call to channel post was just doing something weird. Then when we tried to call the success callback, whether our code was broken or whether our test code was broken, this line itself could possibly fail and expose to us something that we didn't understand about the code. But again, I'm just going to keep reinforcing the general structure of a single test. Clear out the irrelevant data, set up pertinent data, create any necessary mocks or stubs, make the before assertions, perform the action, make the after assertions clean up. And I think when you go back and read that test, that pattern will make sense to you. But for the next part of this video, last part of this video, I want to talk a little bit about the writing process for tests. So when you're actually writing a test, you don't write it precisely in this order. Often what you do, well, let me tell you high level first. You write the before, or you assert the before state, assert the end state, and that's sort of like doing test first development. And then you perform the action, and you stick that in between these two assertions, and then you see what breaks. So when I originally wrote this test, probably the first thing, roughly, that I did was I probably had to set up this override because otherwise the test wouldn't be super meaningful. And then I would write these assertions, assert that the channel post ops are first undefined, and then assert that the channel post ops probably existed when I originally wrote the test. I probably didn't get super precise about these things. And then I would write unread ops process visible. And then I would just run the test and I would see what broke. And what probably like one of the first things that broke is that it tried to, probably made a call to something like messages list current, could mark messages read, and it probably said that that module didn't exist, or maybe this thing just returned a value that led me to a weird place in the code. And when I started getting into those deep interactions, that's when I started writing all of these mocks. I don't think I'm going to belabor this point because it's kind of a hard thing to describe without more context. And I want to talk about one more thing when you're writing tests. And this is sort of covered in the writing process. Again, you kind of like write your assertions, you perform the action in between, see what breaks. Obviously, if it's your code causing the failure, you debug it. You verify that the original data setup was as you predicted. So it could be that your test is failing not because your code's broken, but because you just haven't set up the data in a clean way. Decide whether to stub functions or not. I sort of covered that with the idea that the first time I wrote process visible, one of these modules here probably got in the way of me being able to write a clean test. And then this last thing, consider whether your test reveals structural problems in existing code. And that's where I can kind of give you some more context here. So when you call unread ops process visible, it's entirely reasonable that there are going to be a bunch of side effects of that in the actual Zulip code. You expect notification, you expect to call to notifications to close notification. You certainly expect calls to unread UI to do the UI side effects of this. So again, zooming out to like being a Zulip user, you open up a topic, and messages appear on your screen, not only is the client responsible for telling the server that those messages are now unread, but of course you want to update the UI so the user no longer sees those messages as unread. And that includes not only like on the message pane, removing like whatever UI mechanism tells you the message is unread, but also in the sidebars, updating the unread counts. So these are pretty reasonable side effects. Now, here's where I want to point out a possible code smell. When the message becomes read, you have to call into these message lists.current.view and message list.home.view. And that suggests to me that either the test is stubbing at the wrong level, like it could probably stub deeper, or more likely, if my memory serves correctly, this is an indication that the Zulip code itself probably doesn't have a high level enough abstraction for being able to deal with message lists. The unread ops code shouldn't really have to know the distinction between current and home. And I think if we go up here, yeah, you can see that dealing with these like 3 message lists suggests a possible room for improvement in the actual Zulip code, just to have some sort of layer above these message lists that abstracts some of the details away from the rest of the code. But whenever you see a code smell, it's not, you don't immediately jump to an answer. I mean, it could be that the Zulip code here is fine and this is entirely necessary complexity, but you do want to ask the question. So I think I'll stop here. Again, I think the main point of this video is to reinforce the general structure of a test, clear out irrelevant data, set up pertinent data, create any necessary mocks or stubs, make the before assertion, perform the action, make the after assertion, and then do any necessary cleanup. All right, everybody, thanks for listening. Bye.